Not many topics can trigger me to action as quickly as those related to the education of special needs children. At first, I was very excited when I started to watch this video by Jake Olson in Prager University. It popped up on one of the YouTube channels that I was watching. He talked about how he was lucky. Despite his blindness, he was able to succeed at school. And he was able to go on to college, and he's a blind student at USC, University of Southern California. He talked about how lucky he was to have all the perks that he had. But then he went on to talk about how the only way that all these things happened for him was because his parents were able to afford to send him to a private high school. And the private school gave him the tutor. The private school helped him through all the advanced placement courses. And it gave him the opportunity to have the same opportunities and expectations as other students. Now this is where I started to get disappointed in this video, because he goes on to state that he was in California, and he states, I quote, "If you're a special needs student, you don't have any choice. If you cannot afford a private school, you are stuck in going to the public school that the government chooses for you. I tried that at first, but right off the bat, there were problems. All the special needs students in my district were grouped into one class. Academic ability didn't matter. Interest didn't matter. It only mattered that you had a disability. Even if I were to outperform other students, say in honors chemistry, I couldn't take the class with them because I was blind. This was in Orange County, California, home to some of the nation's top public schools. Imagine what it's like in less fortunate communities. But thanks to my parents, I had options. So I left the public schools and went to the private one." This is where I have an issue with this video. Private school versus public school. My son was diagnosed with autism just shy of his 3rd birthday. He was very much affected by his autism. He was nonverbal, non-social, non-everything, and his future looked very, very bleak. I won't bore you with the details, except to say that it was a long and difficult journey for the little boy who experts thought might never become independent or understand the concept of money, to the college sophomore who's now majoring in business and finance. For this video, one thing is important. All of his education and therapies, every bit of it, was provided through our local public schools. Everything that he is because of the local public schools. I did not send him to private therapy, private lessons. He didn't even have a private tutor. He did have one through the schools, but that was when he was unable to attend classes for a year because of surgeries. That was the only time that he had a tutor, because the school building that he had was not accessible with a wheelchair, which is a major problem. That's a different story. But we never had the money to afford private lessons and private therapies, and there are no schools that are close that I consider to be worth even considering. We made sure that the local schools provided what he needed because it is required by federal law that they do so. We have something called the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act. This is federal law. That means it applies in Ohio, where we are, and all of the other states, including California. The IDEA establishes that each child, regardless of his problems, his disabilities, is afforded a free, appropriate public education, FAPE. What this means varies according to students and their abilities. But each student who is identified as having a disability is given an individualized education plan, the IEP. Every year that is reviewed by parents and teachers, and together they develop what this plan should be. And in this plan, they try to find the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment means that the student should be with his typically developing peers as much as possible. This is not always possible. There are times when they need to be separated because they need specialized help. They cannot have occupational therapy, physical therapy, or speech therapy in the regular classroom. They're often removed for that. Actually, that is what happens when they have the therapies. But then they are returned to class as much as possible. They need to be with their peers. My son learned much of what he learned by being with his peers, with his friends, and he would not be the man that he is today if he was not allowed the opportunity to do that. I do not understand how California, Orange County, would allow for all of their students to be placed in one classroom because they are blind, because they have a disability. That's not a least restrictive environment. We have, well, you may say my son had autism. That's not blindness. That's different. He would not have been allowed in to have all these classes if he was blind. That's not true. When we moved to this small rural community with a small school, there was a student in high school, she was a freshman at the time, who was blind. She'd been blind since birth. And she had attended the local school her entire life. She had aides come in and tutors come in and therapists come in to help her learn to deal with the environment and learn to live independently. She was an amazing student. I substitute taught for years, and I remember the first time I taught her when she was a sophomore at the time, and it was a geometry, or maybe she was a freshman then, I can't remember, but it was geometry. She sat there with her Braille machine taking notes as I talked and explained various geometric concepts, and many of the class looked at me blankly. And she understood, she followed, and she was asked questions. She didn't have a tutor teaching her other things. She was following along with her Braille machine, with the other accommodations that she had, but she understood it. She also took all the sciences that was offered at the school, the same as all the other students. And she graduated with honors. She also was in extracurriculars. She played in the band, and she marched with the band. Yes, a blind student marched with the band. That can happen, and it does happen. Just as my son, with his autism, wrestled, ran track, and played football. If you tell them they can't do it, they won't do that. If you expect them to be able to do that, they can do it. This wasn't a fluke either. We had other students with severe disabilities in our district. One student had actually attended a school for the deaf for years. When he was a sophomore, when he was in I think 6th or 7th grade, he decided that he wanted to come back and go to school with his peers. He was from a large family in the area, and he wanted to be with all of his family and friends. So he came back. He did have an interpreter that was with him, because otherwise Elliot would not have been able to understand what was being said around him. And he was greatly loved by all. Sadly, I can't tell you that this student graduated with honors or went on to attend college. He died suddenly during his sophomore year. It was the week after homecoming, actually. I think on Tuesday, I believe. He started feeling just a little sick. My son sat next to him in class, and then the next day, Elliot was not in class. He died. The same conditions that caused his deafness left his body much weaker than any of us knew. But because he went to the local school, the whole town mourned the loss. I'm eternally grateful that he and his parents decided that he should attend the local school instead of traveling to the city and to the school for the deaf. If Elliot had not attended our school, hundreds would have been deprived of the chance to know him and learn from him. Despite all of his difficulties, Elliot had such a spark of life that was beautiful and contagious. And that is the learning and growing as a community that is needed in our country. It is one of the goals of the least restrictive environment. You have to become part of the community. Isolating special needs students, whether in a special class or in a special school or a private school, deprives all of us of the chance to become a community. Only in the most extreme cases do I advocate for alternative placement. My goal for my children is for them to become independent, contributing members of our society. They cannot do that. They cannot learn to become members of the community if they are isolated from it, and the community cannot learn to accept them if they are segregated from it. Most people, when I was raising my son, asked what school he went to. And I said he went to Upper. He went to our local school. And they said, well, what classes is he taking? I said he's taking college prep classes. He is taking everything that his brother took because he wants to be like his brother. That was his driving force. He wanted to do what his brother did, played football, wrestled. Well, he also ran track, though his brother didn't. But he wanted to have the least restrictive environment. He wanted to become part of the community. And that being part of the community was a driving force in his IEP. Yes, it was also sometimes a fight. But parents have, by law, the opportunity to have a say in where their students are placed. It is not, as was represented in this video, that students are just placed where they want to be because the state decides. Parents are an equal partner in the IEP planning meetings, and we have the right to overrule in certain cases, especially when it can be proven that the least restrictive environment is something that is not being upheld. Parents need to remember that they have a voice and a power, and it needs to be used. For those of us without the resources to send our children to expensive private schools, those of us that live in isolated communities where sending our children to other schools is totally inconceivable. We have to work within the system because it is our only option, but it is also an option that can be optimized and productive. My son was once thought to need constant supervision, and some had little hope for his future academically. But he has succeeded, and he is succeeding. But all of this was done through our public education system. It can be done. There are laws in place, and those laws are there to protect our children and to protect our rights to fight for our children.